Under the dazzling lights of Family Feud, we played for money and a new life. What the cameras didn't know was that my husband was dying, and his final answer would reveal a truth too heartbreaking for television. The lights were hotter than I ever imagined. Not just warm, but a physical weight, pressing down on my skin, baking the cheap, glittery makeup the production assistant had plastered on my face an hour earlier. On TV, the Family Feud set looks like a carnival of joy and friendly competition. In person, it felt like an interrogation room designed by a game show host. I squeezed my husband Mark's hand, feeling the familiar bony pressure of his knuckles against mine. He squeezed back, a weak but reassuring gesture. It was Mark's idea, of course, all of it. From the moment the doctor sat us down in that sterile beige office and used words like aggressive and inoperable, a strange, frantic energy had taken hold of him. While I was falling apart, replaying the diagnosis in my head until the words lost all meaning, Mark was making lists, a will, power of attorney, and wedged between plan funeral music and write letters to the kids were the words, "Get on Family Feud." I thought he was delirious. "Mark, honey, what are you talking about?" I'd asked, my voice hoarse from crying. He'd looked at me, his eyes, once so full of life, now clouded with a terrifying determination. "Sarah," he'd said, "I can't leave you and the kids with nothing. This is a shot. A long shot. But it's a shot. And it'll be fun. One last big adventure for the family. One last big adventure." The words echoed in my head as I looked at our family lined up beside us. My sister Lisa nervously picking at her new dress, Mark's brother Kevin trying to look cool and unfazed, and our 19-year-old son Josh looking pale and scared under the studio lights. We'd lied on the application, of course. Not a full lie, more a sin of omission. When they asked about Mark's recent weight loss and why he'd left his job, we said he was going through some health challenges, but was on the mend. It was easy for them to believe. Mark could still turn on the charm, still flash that wide, infectious grin that made people instantly love him. He was a born salesman, and this was his final sale, convincing the world, for one bright televised hour, that he was perfectly fine. The first few rounds were a blur. The roar of the studio audience, the impossibly loud buzzers, the booming, charismatic presence of Steve Harvey himself. Steve was everything you'd expect, funny, sharp, and genuinely warm. He clapped Mark on the shoulder after a particularly good answer. "All right, Mark." "My man, where'd you pull that one from?" he'd bellowed, and Mark, feeding off the energy, laughed. "Just got a lucky feeling, Steve." For a few minutes I almost forgot. We were just another family, laughing and high-fiving, dreaming of $20,000 and a brand-new car. We were good, too. Mark was on fire, guessing top answers like he was reading Steve's mind. We won the first round, the second, and then the third. The energy was electric. We were going to fast money. As the crew reset the stage, a producer patted Mark on the back. "You're a natural, man. The camera loves you." Mark just smiled, but I saw him subtly lean against the podium for support. I saw the faint sheen of sweat on his brow that had nothing to do with the lights. I saw the exhaustion creeping into the corners of his eyes. He caught me watching him and gave me a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent plea. "Don't. Not now. Stay strong." Steve Harvey returned to the center stage, his smile as bright as the studio lights. "All right, Miller family, you've got one more hurdle to go for the big 20K. Mark, you were on a roll, my man, so you're up first. Let's do this." The audience applauded as Mark walked to the podium, his steps looking a little less steady than they had an hour ago. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 20 seconds. He just had to get through 20 seconds of silly questions. Steve gave him a warm smile. "All right, Mark. 20 seconds on the clock. I need the top answers. Here we go. Name something you do to prepare for a long trip." "Pack a bag," Mark said instantly. Bing. "Name a reason you might be late for work." "Traffic." Bing. He was doing it. He was actually doing it. My shoulders started to relax. 4 questions down, 1 to go. Then Steve asked the final question, his tone light and conversational. "And finally, Mark, name something you hope you'll have more time for in the next 5 years." The clock ticked. 1 second. 2. The studio, which had been buzzing with energy, fell utterly silent. Mark just stared at Steve, his face completely blank. The confident, charming contestant was gone. In his place was my husband, a man who had just been told he likely wouldn't see another Christmas. The easy game show smile on Steve Harvey's face began to falter, replaced by a look of genuine confusion. "Mark," he said softly, leaning into his microphone. "You all right, my man? Something you hope you'll have more time for?" Mark's eyes darted over to me, and in them I saw it all. The pain, the fear, the crushing weight of the secret we were carrying. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin neck. He looked back at Steve, his gaze direct and filled with a sorrow so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The timer buzzed, a harsh, jarring sound that made everyone jump. But no one was looking at the scoreboard. Every single eye in that studio, including the cameras, was fixed on my husband. He finally found his voice, and it was a raw, broken whisper that the microphone picked up with terrifying clarity.
"Time, Steve,"
he rasped, his voice cracking.
"Just time."
A cavernous silence fell over the studio, the kind of silence that's so total you can hear the hum of the giant lights and the faint whir of the air conditioning. The timer's buzz echoed in the void Mark's answer had left behind. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Steve Harvey just stood there, his own $1,000,000 smile frozen on his face. But it wasn't a smile anymore. It was a mask, and I could see it cracking. The polished veneer of the TV host, the man of 1,000 jokes and perfectly timed reactions, dissolved. What was left was just a man, looking at another man who was clearly in a world of pain. He held up a hand, a gesture so subtle it was barely perceptible, but the entire crew responded instantly. "Cut," he said, his voice low, but carrying the undeniable weight of authority. He wasn't speaking into his host microphone anymore, but the sound still carried across the silent stage. "Just stop the clock. Stop everything." Stagehands who had been preparing for the commercial break froze in place. The warm-up comedian's forced smile vanished. In the audience, the sea of bright, expectant faces turned into a gallery of confusion and concern. I saw a cameraman slowly lower his camera, his gaze fixed on my husband. Steve walked around the podium, a slow, deliberate pace that felt like it was happening in another dimension. He came right up to Mark and put a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a back-slapping, good game kind of touch. It was gentle, grounding. "Son," he said, his voice stripped of all its broadcast boom, now just a soft baritone rumble. "Look at me." "What did you mean by that?" Mark looked up, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. He was trembling, a fine, barely visible tremor that I could see because I knew him better than I knew myself. He opened his mouth again, but all that came out was a choked sob. He swayed slightly, and Steve's hand tightened on his shoulder, steadying him. My heart shattered. Our plan, our ridiculous, desperate plan to have one last happy, normal moment, was falling apart in the most public way imaginable. I looked at our family. Josh had his fist pressed against his mouth, his young face a mask of horror. Lisa was openly crying, fat tears rolling down her cheeks and ruining her expensive makeup. Only Kevin looked angry, his jaw tight as he glared at the floor, angry at the disease, at the world, at this whole humiliating spectacle. And I knew, in that instant, that I had to be the one. Mark had carried us this far, but he couldn't any more. I took a step forward, my legs feeling like they were filled with sand. "Mr. Harvey?" My own voice sounded thin and reedy in the silent studio. He turned his head, his eyes finding mine. They were full of a deep, profound compassion that caught me completely off guard. "I'm Sarah," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm his wife." He nodded slowly. "Sarah. Can you tell me what's going on with your husband?" I took a deep breath, the hot, recycled air stinging my lungs. I looked at Mark, at his pale, beautiful face, and I let the truth out. The words we had kept locked away behind fake smiles and brave faces for months. "He has cancer, Mr. Harvey." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. I didn't care. I couldn't stop. The words were tumbling out now, a painful, unstoppable flood. Pancreatic, stage 4, the doctors, they gave him 6 months. I felt Lisa's hand grab my arm, trying to pull me back, but I shook her off. I had to finish. I had to make him understand. "That was 3 months ago. The money. We just wanted to make sure the kids were okay. This was his idea. One last happy memory." Steve's eyes closed for a second, and he took a sharp breath, as if my words had physically struck him. He looked down at Mark, then back at me, and his own eyes were shining with moisture. Just then, a man in a headset and a crisp suit rushed onto the stage, whispering urgently in Steve's ear. "Steve, we need to go to break. We can edit this out, reset. We can handle this." I could see the producer's panic, the desperate attempt to wrestle control back, to shove our messy, inconvenient reality back into a neat 30-minute television box. Steve didn't even look at him. He gently squeezed Mark's shoulder one last time and then straightened up to his full height. He looked at the producer, then at the silent audience, then at our broken little family. He held up his hand again, this time silencing the man in the suit. "No," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound power. "We're not going to break, and we're not editing a damn thing out." He turned and pointed a finger at the giant glittering scoreboard, displaying Mark's paltry, fast money score. "And that score up there? It doesn't mean a thing right now." He looked directly at me, his gaze so intense it felt like he was looking into my soul. A fire I hadn't expected ignited in his eyes. "Here's what's going to happen." Steve Harvey's voice dropped, losing its warm, friendly tone, and taking on the resonance of a preacher in his pulpit. He looked past the producer, past the cameras, and seemed to address every single person in the room, and even the millions he knew would eventually be watching at home. "For the last hour," he began, his voice quiet but electric, "we've been playing a game. We've been guessing what 100 people said. We've been playing for points. Well, a man just stood up on this stage and gave an answer that's truer than anything anyone is ever going to say on this show. He said he wants more time. And that puts all these lights, these buzzers, this money. It puts it all in perspective, doesn't it?" He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The producer, the man in the suit, took another step forward. "Steve, with all due respect, the network has rules. The game has rules." Steve whipped his head around to face him, his eyes blazing. "The game is over," he said, the words sharp and final. "And the rules just changed. Are we clear?" The producer's mouth clamped shut, his face a mask of controlled fury. He knew he'd lost. In that moment, Steve Harvey wasn't an employee. He was the king of this domain, and his word was law. Steve turned his attention to the other family, the Jacksons, who had been standing awkwardly at their podium, watching the whole drama unfold. They looked like a lovely family, a mom, a dad, and their 2 college-aged daughters. "Jackson family," Steve said, his voice softening again. "I know you came here to win. You've played a great game. But I have to ask you a question. Right now, are you competitors, or are you family?" The father, a burly man with kind eyes, didn't hesitate. He looked over at Mark, then at me and our weeping son, and his own eyes welled up. He picked up his microphone. "We're family, Steve," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're all family here." His wife and daughters nodded vigorously, tears streaming down their faces. A wave of applause, soft at first and then thunderous, erupted from the audience. It wasn't the polite, prompted applause from before. This was real. It was a roar of approval, of empathy, of shared humanity. Steve let it wash over the stage for a moment, then held up his hand for silence. "Then it's settled," he declared. He walked over to the fast money podium, right next to my trembling husband. He looked up at the giant digital display. Mark's score was a pathetic 74. It would have been my turn next, and there was no way I could have pulled us over the 200-point mark needed to win. "We heard 5 answers from Mark," Steve announced, "but the only one that matters is the one he couldn't give, the one the clock ran out on. You know, the board says the top answer is worth the most points, and I think we can all agree that the number 1 answer to the question, 'What do you hope you'll have more time for?' is time itself. It's our family. It's our life." He turned to a stunned-looking technician sitting off-stage. "Gary, can you give me a point value for the answer time?" The technician just stared, dumbfounded. Steve laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Never mind, I'll do it myself." He looked back up at the board. "Let's see. A man fighting for his life, for his family. I'd say that answer is worth, how about 200 points? The crowd roared its approval. "No, you know what? That's not enough. That answer is worth everything. Gary, put 500 points on the board for Mark Miller." The technician, galvanized into action, typed furiously at his console. The numbers on the scoreboard next to Mark's name began to spin. 74, 150, 200. The celebratory winner chime, which I thought I'd never hear, blared through the studio speakers. The numbers kept climbing, finally stopping at 574. The words "winner" flashed in bright, gaudy colors. $20,000. The weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for months, the suffocating fear of debt and bills and leaving my children with nothing, suddenly lifted. A sound escaped my throat, a strangled gasp that was half sob, half laugh. I ran to Mark, and our whole family collapsed around him, a tangle of arms and tears. The Jackson family came over and hugged us too, strangers embracing us like we were their own. The standing ovation from the audience was deafening. Through the blur of my tears, I saw Steve Harvey watching us, not with a host's triumphant smile, but with the quiet, profound sadness of a man who understood the victory was only temporary. The show ended. The lights dimmed. The audience filed out, many of them still dabbing at their eyes. We were led backstage to a small green room, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind a fragile, trembling sense of peace. A production assistant brought us water and told us someone would be in shortly to handle the paperwork for the prize money. For the first time in a long time, we were just a family, huddled together, Mark's head resting on my shoulder, his breathing shallow but steady. The door opened, and Steve Harvey came in, his face etched with exhaustion. Before he could speak, the man in the suit, the producer, pushed past him, a grim, determined look on his face. He wasn't looking at us. He was looking directly at Steve. "We have a problem," the producer said, his voice cold and clipped. "A very big problem. The network is on the phone. They saw the raw feed. What you did—" "Steve, you can't just give away the network's money. You broke the rules. You might have just broken your contract." Steve, Harvey didn't even flinch. He held the producer's gaze for a long, silent moment, the air in the small green room crackling with tension. It felt like we were watching a showdown from an old Western. Then a slow, weary smile touched Steve's lips. "Is that what they're worried about?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. "The money? Let me tell you something, Stan. You can tell the network that Steve Harvey will personally write the check for $20,000. I'll cover it. But you tell them that this episode is airing exactly as it happened. No edits, no cuts. You tell them that if they have a problem with that, they can have my contract too. I'll walk away from this show today." Stan, the producer, looked like he'd been slapped. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The sheer, unshakable conviction in Steve's voice had completely disarmed him. He stared at Steve. Then his eyes flickered over to our family, huddled on the cheap sofa, Mark looking so fragile, and me with my tear-streaked face. For the first time, a glimmer of something other than professional panic crossed his features. He simply nodded, a short, jerky motion, and backed out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense anymore. It was filled with a profound sense of gratitude that was too big for words. Steve's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of the confrontation leaving him. He looked over at us, and his expression was one of infinite kindness. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice raspy, "for all of this, for putting your family through this on national television. That wasn't my intention, Mark," summoning a strength I didn't know he had left, pushed himself up a little straighter. "Mr. Harvey," he said, his voice weak but clear, "you have nothing to be sorry for. You gave my family a gift we could never repay. "The money will help," Steve said, waving a hand dismissively. "But that's not what I'm talking about. What you did out there, Mark, you were honest. In a world full of fake, you were real. You gave people a gift, too. You reminded them what's important. It's not the new car, the vacation, the top answer on the board. It's time. Just time." He walked over and sat on the arm of the sofa next to our son, Josh. He put a hand on Josh's shoulder. "Your father is a brave man," he said, looking Josh right in the eye. "Don't you ever forget that." He stood on that stage in front of millions of people, and he told the truth. That takes a kind of courage most people will never know. Josh, who had been trying so hard to be strong for us, finally broke, burying his face in his hands and sobbing. And Steve just sat there with him, a quiet, solid presence, letting him grieve. The rest of the evening was a blur of paperwork and quiet conversations. The network, faced with Steve's ultimatum and the undeniable power of what had transpired, backed down. The episode would air. The prize money was ours, no strings attached. As we were getting ready to leave, a young woman from the production team came in with a large envelope. It contained the check, but there was something else inside. It was a card, handwritten by Steve. "Mark," it read, "your family's final answer was love. And for that, there is no dollar amount. I'm praying for you all. Stay strong. Your friend, Steve." Tucked inside the card was his personal phone number. "Call me," he'd written at the bottom, "for anything." Mark didn't get his 6 months. He didn't even get 5. He passed away peacefully, at home, just 9 weeks after the show was taped. The episode aired the week after his funeral. We watched it together, our family and Mark's, crowded into our living room. It was unbearably painful to see him so full of life on that screen, but it was beautiful, too. The producers had done exactly what Steve demanded. They left it all in. The awkward silence, Mark's whispered answer, Steve stopping the show, all of it. They ended the episode not with a commercial for a new car, but with a simple black screen that said, "In loving memory of Mark Miller," followed by a link to a pancreatic cancer research foundation. The response was overwhelming. Our story went viral. The foundation received a flood of donations, but more than that, we received thousands of letters, emails, and messages from people all over the world. People who had lost loved ones, people who were fighting their own battles, people who just wanted to say that our story had touched them, that it had made them hug their kids a little tighter, that it had reminded them to appreciate the time they had. The $20,000 was a lifeline. It paid for the funeral, cleared our debts, and gave me the breathing room I needed to grieve without panicking about finances. But the true gift wasn't the money. It was the legacy Mark left behind. His last big adventure, his final sale, wasn't about winning a game show. It was about teaching a lesson. In his most vulnerable moment, my husband gave the world an answer that couldn't be found on any survey board, an answer that echoed in the hearts of millions. The most valuable prize of all is simply one more day. And thanks to him, and the unexpected kindness of a man on a TV stage, we learned to treasure every single one we had left.